they can be looked at as pathways to sanctification. To undertake each of these acts merely because they need to be done is to fail to see in them their real purpose. With every challenge that comes up in a marriage, it is an opportunity to renounce some earthly attachment for what will be best for the whole family, ultimately drawing everyone involved into a fuller union with God. True love for one's family comes through participation in God. It must. There is nowhere else from which true love comes. It turns the suffering involved in the daily living out of marriage into a joy, a willingness to endure challenges because of the goods that come from performing such acts in a loving manner. Keep in mind that sacrifice is not just offering up of difficult things. It is every act by which we are united to God in a holy fellowship. The main act in which man and woman give themselves to each other out of love is the marital act. This gift of self to each other is the highest expression of the not fully expressible love between the couple. Husband and wife become one flesh. It is their particular participation in the love that God is. The marriage bond is forged in the vows at the altar of sacrifice, consummated in the marriage bed, and reproposed in every marital act thereafter. The marital act is ordered to the generation and education of children, and thereby to the extension of the body of Christ. When properly lived out, this sacrificial married life continues to deepen the relationship of the spouses with each other, their relationship with their children, and the whole family's relationship with God. Without sacrifice, marriages suffer. If it has not been manifest, married couples need to give of themselves to each other. A lack of sacrifice leads to a lack of participation in God, a lack of real love. The spiritual life is dynamic. We're always moving either toward or away from God. Without consistently joining themselves more deeply to a union with God, a couple will begin to stagnate and eventually regress. If they cease to grow into a deeper union with God, they cut themselves off from the source of all love, the source of all virtues. By ourselves, we cannot maintain virtuous lives, so we fall into vice. Vices pull couples apart from each other. Nothing, not even those vices, can break the marital bond that unites them as husband and wife. But the vices can and do affect the couple's view of each other, their family, and the value they place on their bond. If a marriage lacks sacrifice, it suffers. Marriage, like the other sacraments, is ordered toward the Eucharist. The couple, by being an image of Christ in the Church, come to understand Christ more deeply in the sacrifice and reception of his true body and blood. By sacrificing for each other and uniting their sacrifices to Christ's, they more deeply participate in his sacrifice on the altar. The vows being recited near the altar, then, become even more significant. By offering themselves up to each other in their wedding vows and reproposing those vows to each other in every marital act, the couple mirrors Christ, who offered himself for his bride once on the altar of the cross and continually re-offers himself on millions of Catholic altars around the world every day. Recently, we have seen in many but not all parishes a lack of emphasis on the sacrifice of the Mass. Looking toward other elements, particularly each other, is the main purpose. This has also coincided with a lack of emphasis on sacrifice within marriage. Now, I do not propose that this is the only factor for lack of sacrifice in marriage, but I do propose that this lack of emphasis on the sacrifice of the Eucharist failed to help many couples build proper marriages so that they could sacrifice alongside each other, drawing further into union with God and more fully loving each other and their children. We must recover the idea of sacrifice, both in worship and in everyday life, so that we may fully live out what God has ordered us toward. If we take Augustine's definition that sacrifice is any act that unites us to God in holy fellowship, then we see that the recovery of sacrifice is the recovery of love in a radical form. From that, we can take further advice from Augustine. Love, and then do what you want.